This is from a webinar recorded on April 10th, 2025. Find the full recording and the rest of the library of past webinars at www.modernideasforbusiness.com.
I'm happy to introduce our speaker today, Becky Barton. Becky is Chief Executive Officer of People 415, a San Francisco-based human resource consultancy firm helping companies navigate growth with services that include recruiting and hiring, compensation strategy, organizational development, talent management, and succession planning. Becky is really recognized as a thought leader on optimizing performance for startups and companies on the move by aligning talent with strategy. With over 25 years of experience, Becky has led HR strategy in nonprofit, startup, professional services, and creative agency organizations. So with that, Becky, I'm happy to turn it over to you and look forward to a really fascinating webinar today.
Well, thank you so much, David. I appreciate the introduction. And in line with the mission of Modern Ideas for Business, I think we have plenty to talk about today that mirrors those challenges in economics, political, the legal landscape today. So we've got a lot to chat about in today's business world. I'm really excited to be here. Let me share my deck here to get us sort of kicked off. I always like to know where folks are dialing in from, so I definitely encourage you to drop in the chat, your name, and the business you're with and where you're physically located. It will come into play today because there's some things that are changing at the federal level, some things that are changing at the state level, and it's always helpful to know a little bit about where folks are. I'm physically located in Truckee, California, so my virtual assistant loves to put this bear up here saying hello. They are awakening right now. Spring is here. So we're going to be talking about HR, human resources, what to expect under this new administration, and how things are unfolding so far this year. Just a little bit about me. I think David covered it pretty well. One thing I do want to, Matthew Cahill says, I do want to encourage, respectful conversation on today's call, but certainly if there's anything that, strikes you as biased, please call me out on that. That's definitely my intention, is to be as unbiased as possible. I do also want to point out we're covering a point in time, right? This is April 10th. Happens to be my husband's 50th birthday, so it's an easy date for me to remember. But this is a point in time. Things are still evolving. They'll continue to evolve, and we'll talk about that today as well. And then finally, today, this is not legal advice. This is just meant to give you information. So just please take that into consideration with anything that's shared for today. So what's really interesting is, given, this is Trump's second administration and, term in the office, we have a lot to look back historical to understand kind of what might be that predictor of future behavior. And the general theme that you'll hear throughout our discussion today is, Trump has a history and is currently handling things very much in a pro-employer as well as pro-state fashion. So less regulation at the federal level, more freedom for businesses to do the work that they do without regulation. And so we'll likely see things getting scrapped at the federal level, but then the states in turn will likely, kind of sort of move to adopt their own regulation. And when you signed up for this chat for today, we had a few key things in terms of takeaways. These are the big items we'll cover today. I've given this talk a few times, and I've found immigration, immigration enforcement and reform there certainly is a really hot topic. We'll probably spend a good amount of time there. And then some of this, the DEIB stuff and the AI stuff seems to be, sort of some of the hotter topics. So I'm going to do my best to pace us with the time that we have allowed today. As David mentioned, I do want this to be, conversational. So if someone actually from the Modern Ideas for Business crew could just monitor the chat, if there is a question, that would be helpful just to keep me.
Sure, Becky. Ed and I will watch that for you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so I am a California-based company, and most of the clients that People 415 works with have employees in California. So you will hear me call out some California-specific stuff because California is a more regulated state in terms of, as it compares to at the federal level. But just to give you a little bit of kind of the story of, minimum wage and overtime, during Biden's term, the federal minimum wage was at $7.25 per hour. And that's for your hourly employees, but for your salary employees, those exempt employees, Biden really wanted to up the salary threshold, meaning he really wanted to see salary go up from $35,000 annually to step up to $44,000, and then again another step up to $59,000. And so that was sort of in the works already when Trump came into play. And what's happened since is the federal threshold for that salary exemption has been actually knocked down. So it's a lot of organizations were starting to step up their salary to meet, Biden's regulations, but the Trump administration and actually in the court system, they struck down both of those increases. So now it remains at $35,000. And so what does that mean? Some companies went ahead and they made those changes to step up employees. So that did create an employee relations challenge because, businesses have to decide, what are we going to do with this new information? Are we going to now take it away? Or are we going to keep it there? So it did create a lot of confusion for employers that were trying to get ahead of that, increase in salary. But the reality is at the federal level, it did not increase. California, on the other hand, has its own threshold. So I just want to be very clear about that. If you're classifying someone as exempt, there's a lot of rules as to how you do that. One of the rules is a salary threshold and how much you pay that person. So for 2025, California currently is just over $68K. The other thing that was really interesting, because when we talk about minimum wage, these are hourly employees. That means if they're non-exempt, that means they are eligible for things like overtime. And Trump is a fan of having no taxes on overtime. He talked about that on the campaign trail. But it is very unlikely that this will actually come into effect. It's very complicated to implement, as you might imagine. Certain wages are taxed, certain wages are not. So it's likely not to happen, and so we don't anticipate, seeing that come through.
Hey Becky, thanks for interrupting.
Yeah. Sure.
This is Dave. I did have one question because I'm working on this with a client now on the California salary threshold for exempt status. And I know the rules are somewhat complicated, but is that true also for salespeople, especially like outside salespeople, where a big part of their compensation is commissions or variable pay?
Great question. So we could almost have a webcast just on exempt and non-exempt status in California. Yeah, because you're right. There are different categories. Computer folks have different categories. Sales folks, there's different exemption class, groups. And so it would be tough for me to answer that on this call because there's a lot that goes into that, but I'm happy to take it offline with you.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, you bet. So any other questions coming through the chat before I move on to our next topic here? No. All right, I'll keep going.
Not yet.
Okay, perfect. So, workplace safety, we saw a lot come out after COVID, a lot of regulations in terms of, safety in the workplace. And as well as, heat safety, meaning, providing a safe environment if temperatures go above, say, 80 degrees in a manufacturing setting. So during the Biden administration, there was a heat safety rule that came out and was supposed to go into effect, but that is not going to happen at the federal level. So again, we're seeing that sort of, rollback of regulation, based on Trump's last term. We would anticipate that there will be less inspectors. We all know there's cuts happening at the federal level. So there's going to be likely some cuts there, which means less regulations. We do have now a new head of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We have a new lead there, David Keeling. And so what we will generally see is, again, less regulation, less need for reporting out, less, inspections happening and things like that. I do want to say that California does have some of its own rules. So California has, its own rules around heat safety, workplace violence prevention, a lot of different safety programming. Those will stay in effect. But I think the headliner for, anyone that's also maybe outside of California, you still have an obligation to provide a safe work environment for your employees. That is not going away.
You can find the complete recording and many others at www.modernideas4business.com. Find out about our upcoming speakers at modernideas4business.com.